Hey, it's Jordan. I am delighted to be joined by Rachel Ventura. You are running in Illinois, the 11th district for Congress. And boy, Illinois. Uh, excuse me, here's my New York. Illinois, no S. I got reprimanded.
Yeah, I didn't want to correct you.
Yeah, that's okay. Illinois, which I've been to Chicago and other parts of the state. Not exactly the most clean democracy, I would say. A lot of corruption, but you're running on a bold, progressive platform, which we'll get into. I wanted to start, though, because you have an interesting story. You kind of worked inside the belly of the beast of the healthcare industry and
Yes.
then kind of got out of that. Can you kind of talk about your backstory?
Yeah, so I went to school and got a math degree and became an actuary or was working towards passing the exam. So I was technically an actual analyst. And I initially worked for a health insurance company, and we set the premiums and costs for managed care type products. And so what I would look at is what were doctors charging in different zip codes, what were charging, what was hospitals charging, what were different insurance rates being applied there, what was the rates of heart attacks or C-sections, or and basically cost analysis. And then, hospitals charge different things depending on how many people go to their facility or don't go to their facility. So if you have a hospital that's 30 minutes out and maybe it's a high rate of heart attacks, maybe people aren't willing to drive 30 minutes out. So a hospital nearby might charge a higher premium or higher rate because more people will go to that hospital versus a further one out. So there's price fixing all over the industry. And so the insurance companies obviously don't want to get caught up in some of that. And so they do set some pricing that's what decides whether something's in the network or not, whether your doctor is in the network or not is based on his cost. I left that and went to life insurance, and they did a lot of the same type of things. We looked at products that we would lose money on if a lot of people died under these circumstances during this time, what the stock market was at, or where our invested dollars were at, what would be the loss to the company. And if there was a loss in that product, then we would end the product. We'd upgrade people or move them off those products so that the companies never lost money. But it also meant that people weren't always getting the best care, the best access, the best life insurance premiums being paid back on universal products. So those are just some of the examples I walked away from. But as a military spouse, for 10 years, I was a spouse for 10 years. And during that time, my family was covered under TRICARE. My children are still covered under TRICARE. This is the best universal single payer system we have in America today. Millions of Americans are on it, and it does what the improved Medicare for All bill is intended to do, and that is to you pay a amount out of your paycheck as a payroll tax, and then that individual who's on basically TRICARE gets access to doctors and nurses and hospitals. If they're in a facility of a base, they need to first go to the base. Otherwise, they can choose their private physician. So when I had my twins, I had a high-risk pregnancy, lots of ultrasounds. I had complications in the hospital, spent 4 days, had 2 blood transfusions, and all I paid for my 2 girls was $18 per child for an elected test that we did after they were born.
Wow.
So we already have this system. The government already sets prices across the board for doctors and hospitals and clinics and pharmaceuticals. And then people pay in a small amount and everybody has access to services. It's not based on how sick you are. It's purely a percentage of how much you get paid. So I know that we have the ability in this country to do it because we're already doing it. And I think if more Americans knew that we were doing that, then there would be even bigger rush to have Medicare for All improved. So it's not insurance like it is today, but a health care system.
Mhm. What's interesting to me, and there was an interview on CNN yesterday. I hope you didn't have to watch it because it was painful. But basically, a lot of these corporate media outlets, obviously Democrats, they talk like private health insurance is this beloved thing in America, and people just don't want to lose their private health insurance. But it seems like you kind of saw, being inside as an actuary, plenty of people who probably couldn't afford it or were kicked off. Can you
Yep.
kind of talk about some of the things you saw as far as it's not that people were dying for private health insurance, it's that, they like their doctors and things like that?
Right. Well, I mean, that's what it comes down to. When you go to a doctor, you're going on whatever your, most of the time, what is in the network. Okay.
Hmm.
You're not choosing like, oh, the guy down the street's a doctor. He's really nice. I'm going to go see him. No, you're calling your insurance company first and saying, well, who's in my network? Who can I afford? And the networks are all designed around the cost analysis that the actuaries do, whether or not that group of doctors should be in the network or not in the network. If they charge over the allotted amount and they're unwilling to take what the insurance, or for TRICARE, for example, what the government has placed that they said that they will pay. For the government, then the pay cannot be given to the individual. The doctor has to accept that that is the government rate, and they've accepted to take that rate, and that's it. Insurance companies, on the other hand, though, if the doctor charges $300 for a visit and the insurance company says, well, we'll pay $100 because that's what our analysis of the zip code is, then the $200 does get passed on to the individual. So yeah, there's lots of times when people then stop going to the doctor, even for healthy checkups, because they're like, well, I don't want to go to the doctor and pay $300 or $200 when there's nothing wrong with me. But those important checkups can help prevent future illnesses and catch things that, whether you've got high blood pressure or whatever. I mean, you have lots of examples of that. So those are problems where we can see that people are profiting off the sickness of others, not the intention of getting them well and keeping them out. Initially, that's one reason insurance has actually included wellness checks, was it was to keep long-term high costs down. Because if you think of what insurance is, it's to insure against, catastrophic events in a sense. So insurance doesn't work when it comes to healthcare, right? Because we need to take care of ourselves on a daily basis. There's always going to be something that's happening with your body. With life insurance, what you're insuring is that you have more years than not, right? We know the death is going to come, but the insurance is basically saying, well, you pay a higher amount if it looks like you're at higher risk of dying, you pay a lower amount if you're not. That's why babies are the cheapest thing to insure, because they have ideally the best health right after birth. Mm-hmm. So these are examples, though, of how we've gone from actually insuring someone for something horrible like a heart attack to needing everyday care. But when we start charging extra for all these different things because we don't actually have a healthcare system, we have an insurance system, that's when we get ourselves in this sticky situation. That puts the onus on small businesses to have some type of healthcare package for their employees, or forces them to do freelance work, 1099 type work. That's not a booming economy. That's not helping across the board with our economic development. I mean, there's lots of people who have great ideas that they want to go off and create a business, and they can't because they can't afford the insurance packages.
Right.
That's a problem.
And from this kind of warp system, you became, I think, a veterinary assistant, and then you did some work in the forest. And can you kind of talk about your evolution?
Yeah, so I left. I was living in LA, working for an insurance company. Moved into marketing when I wanted to take a step out of being an actuary, and I was also volunteering at the Wildlife Waste Station, which is a agency that takes in exotic animals that people should not probably have, like lions and tigers, and doing work with them as a volunteer. I was like, you know what, I really want to work with animals and get back to feeling good about the work that I'm putting into the world. And so I went back to school to get a biology degree so I could become a veterinarian. As I was working as a pet nurse out in Virginia Beach, I looked for a very large corporation. I'm not talking about small mom and pop veterinarian places, but a large corporation. And their big thing was, well, you need to do all these extra tests. Not all of them were necessary for procedures, but it was because there was dollar amounts. How can we get one more dollar amount on it? Well, did you do this extra test? Well, no, that's not really needed for this procedure. Oh, well, but we could charge this extra money here. And that was not the type of veterinarian I wanted to be. At that time, I married a military man, and we moved to Georgia. And instead of working at a veterinarian hospital, I took a job with the Georgia State Parks as a naturalist. And I have to say that was one of the best jobs I've ever had. I got to educate people on the land. I got to run programming. I got to work with the endangered gopher tortoise to try and track them and count their numbers. I mean, it was just really good stuff for my heart, for getting back to protecting our planet and doing what's right for people.
So let's fast forward. You're in Illinois. Obviously, a lot of people think of Michigan, Wisconsin, Pennsylvania, Ohio as the Rust Belt, but Illinois is in there. It just has long been, it's not a swing state, but deindustrialization has definitely hit Illinois. Obviously, Chicago is kind of your classic haves and have-nots. What kind of inspired you to run? Who are you running against? I know you're for Medicare for All, but what are some of the other things you're proposing, and anything else about your campaign?
Yeah, so I moved back in 2016, and I was shocked at the state of my city. When I left here after college, 2002, the city was booming. They had put a lot of work into beautifying the town, and so I came back.
Which city?
I live in Joliet, Illinois.
Okay.
I saw broken street signs, trash everywhere. The roads were all tore up. Things that we're seeing across America. Basically, the de-investation, investing in our communities. And so I was complaining to my dad about it, and he said, "Why don't you do something and run for government?" And I was like, "Well, that doesn't seem like a great idea while I'm going through a divorce, Dad." And but then it really stuck with me, and I was like, I do have some good ideas, and we've got a lot of amazing assets here in Joliet. And I said, if we brought tourism here, that would really help, breathe new life into our town. And so I initially ran on a platform of, bringing tourism here, but also just beautifying everything that we had and giving value back. When I started knocking doors, I learned so much more about the problems that were affecting everyday people. And it went so much further than just our city council not investing in our town. There were so many other issues. I got a fast lesson in politics in Illinois, put it that way. I did not run with support of it was a nonpartisan election, but as a Democrat, I didn't have any support there. I was a newcomer. People didn't know who I was. So initially I thought, okay, they're suspect to who I am. That's okay. I'll prove myself and do this race. And I had a very favorable showing, even though I did not win.
And you were running for Congress, or?
I was running for city council.
Okay.
At large. And so after the election ended, there was a spot on the county board, and so I ran for that. And I had expected the party to support me, not because I'm just a Democrat, but because I went to them and said, "Hey, here's my platform. This is what I think. I'm a hardworking candidate. I've got some great ideas." And I was told, "Well, it's not really your time. Somebody else has been selected for this position."
Yep.
And that was shocking to me, because I thought that primaries were to put the best candidate forward. So don't you want candidates running in a primary? And so, again, those lessons I was learning, what it meant in Illinois politics. And so I ran anyway, even though lots of people told me, don't run, don't run. I ran because it was the right thing to do, that we had problems here, and we knocked 10,000 doors. We got the message out about some of the problems that we have, and we have solved those problems in the last 8 months since I've been on the board. Now, there's still plenty of work to be done, and I still continue to do those things as I'm running for Congress now. But much like my county board race, when I started going to party establishments and saying, "Hey, I'm thinking about running this race. What do you think?" People are like, "Oh, why would you primary an incumbent? Isn't he deserving of that role?" And my answer to that is, well, isn't the taxpayers supposed to be the ones deciding who's deserving that role? And when do they do that, if not in a primary? Mm-hmm. So I do think that the party has shifted. And I think that the things that I'm running on now are crucial and urgent, and we need a leader who has a strong voice to bring that forth. But also, there's a lot of healing that needs to happen in America, and we need to start off with honesty, decency, bring integrity to every position in our government from the top down, so that we can be better leaders and more compasses for those who need that. Mm-hmm. As for the other platforms I'm running on, so Green New Deal is definitely a cornerstone, because it affects not just climate change, which is, as you probably are aware of, very urgent right now. We have 12 years by the latest IPCC report to do something before it becomes irreversible, but also the wealth inequalities in our country. So putting Americans back to work, much like FDR did with the New Deal after the Great Depression, we need to invest in our communities and people again. We need living wage, union paid jobs. And when I say living wage, what I mean by that is we can start with $15 minimum wage, but it needs to be indexed with inflation. So I don't like to say minimum wage as much as I like to say living wage, because when you just talk about the minimum wage, you ignore the cost aspects of housing and food and all those things. When you talk about a living wage, you have to have that comparison of, well, what does it cost to live? And so that it's very important to have that index with inflation. Otherwise, we'll have the same argument in another 10 years from now.
Right.
So the Green New Deal also affects bringing emissions down to zero, cleaning up we have a lot of pollutants that we need to take care of. We need clean water, we need clean air. We also need businesses to invest in these things. So this is a way to put money back into the wealth of small business owners, everyday Americans, retrain people who maybe work in oil refineries now to move into carbon farms or wind farms or solar farms. That's what we need to do right now, invest back in. So that's a real cornerstone of our campaign. We talked about Medicare for All, but there's a lot of other smaller, not to say smaller issues, but maybe less talked about issues that affect millions of Americans. Things like our criminal justice reform, immigration reform. I'd like to see that our immigration is actually separated into two separate policies. One for people who are coming here for work or optional reasons to come here. That's what I would consider true immigration. And then a second policy for asylum seekers and refugees. And as climate change continues to affect our planet, we're going to see more than 3 countries need help. And we don't know all the areas that are going to necessarily need help, even though scientists have projected that. We don't know the first is going to be hit, how hard they're going to be hit, things like that. So we need to have a policy that allows for decency and treating people with dignity. And that means investing money into currently our immigration courts so that we can get people through a process without locking them in cages, then that's something that we need to look at investing. And then also, what does it mean to be an immigrant within our own country? And I don't mean because I came from another country, but the idea of immigration is going to change when we have people fleeing the coastlines, coming up from the south because it's hot. Illinois is right in the middle state, and right now we have access to large bodies of clean, fresh water. So what does that mean for the rest of the country if they start immigrating to Illinois? How are we going to handle that? Mm-hmm. I would definitely hope that we would not put people in cages here at our Illinois borders. But these are things that we should be thinking about for the future to make sure that we have forward progress, but also that we are keeping an eye on what it means for our humanity and how we treat one another.
And let's give a little behind the scenes, because you're a progressive primary challenger. Who are you running against? It seems like the party is probably very much against you. I assume you're not taking, corporate money as part of your. So who are you running against? What has and has he not, he or she, done, and why do they need to be replaced?
So I'm running against Bill Foster. He's been in office for about 9.5 years right now. And he runs as a scientist, but yet has not done anything to affect climate change. But every election cycle, he reminds us that he is a scientist. So I would expect him to be the forefront leader of the Green New Deal. And he has decided not to sign on to it at this point. He also is not in favor of Medicare for All. He has publicly and in letters sent out information saying that he is supporting the Affordable Care Act, and he wants to strengthen that. That is a system it was a stepping stone, but it is no longer working. When 39 million Americans are underinsured or uninsured, that's not a system that's working. Nor are the premiums affordable or the copays for many Americans. There are some other things that we can kind of get into, but I guess at the end of the day, I would say that I present myself as a better candidate because I have a better platform of how we're going to affect Americans today. I don't think Bill has been the voice in the last few years that we need. He did an adequate job in his early years, but as the party shifts, we need to take on these urgent issues, and sitting back and just putting some research dollars in science is not doing it. We know the research, we know the science. We need the political will to start moving forward on the solutions. And to be honest, we're a little bit behind the 8 ball on this.
And are you seeing more of an opening and more interest in progressive candidates and progressive policies in Joliet and Illinois? Because obviously, your J.B. Pritzker was a billionaire who just bought the governorship there in Illinois. Are you seeing an appetite for capital P progressive? Because when I think Illinois, you kind of think establishment, Democrat, stronghold.
Yeah. So one of the things when I'm at doors is, I don't push the big progressive thing. I push the common sense thing, right? I don't want to be a label. I don't want to be, an icon for this certain thing. I want our government to work for everyone. And to do that, we have to talk about real solutions. And so instead of focusing on right, left, or middle. Let's focus on what helps us today. What's the common sense thing to do? If it's broken, we need to move away from those systems and create a system that works for everybody. That resonates with people because, I'm not trying to convert them to something. I just want them to understand that I'm here for them and I'm willing to do what's right. And when we knocked doors, obviously I was not supported by the party establishment in my last race, but I was the top vote getter by 11% over the other Democrat. There was 2 seats, and 8% over the Republican. So for someone who raised very little money, I raised $16,000 in my county board race. I was easily outspent by 2-3 times that. It really comes down to connecting with people, listening to them and saying, okay, I hear you. I hear what your needs are. Surprisingly, my needs are not that much different. So let's work on this together. And I think that's a government that people want. Leave the labels at the door and let's get down to the hard work.
And lastly, if elected and Nancy Pelosi is continuing, if she's the speaker still, is continuing to call it the Green New Dream and kind of dismiss Medicare for all, seems like AOC and these other congresswomen are trying to kind of thread the needle, push back a little bit, but not too much. Are you prepared to be grouped, I don't want to say with the squad, but kind of put on a little deserted island by the Democratic establishment? And, as best as you can, fight back.
Yeah, I think it's time that instead of having those 4 very strong women be the exception to the rule, that they become the beginning pattern of that rule. And races like mine will have that next step in the pattern. So that, I'm going up with someone who's got $3 million and has been entrenched in our politics for a long time. I think they've lost sight of what the Americans in our district are saying today that they need. And one of the things that the squad does is they're listening to their constituent and they're being a voice for them. That needs to be the pattern, so that when I win this race, the next race makes it a little bit easier for the next person to come in and say, you know what, I'm also not taking corporate PAC dollars because I'm not going to listen to the few, but I'm going to listen to the many because that's what's important in our government. And so if that's what it takes, if they got to put me in that category, then so be it. But I'm willing to work with all allies to fix our government, regardless of what side of the aisle they're on. Again, this does not have to be a left, right, center thing. This just needs to be fixing the problems and moving forward.
And where can people find out more, support you if they want? Where do people go?
My website is rachelfventura.com, or you can go to Facebook, Twitter, Instagram, Snapchat, and look for Elect Ventura.
Great. And we're going to be doing a lot more of these for the audience. So if you're a candidate that wants to get on with us, info@statuscoup.com. We'll try to get to as many as possible. We're kind of inundated with emails, but we definitely want to give progressives a voice. And keep in touch so we can follow up later in the campaign.
Thank you.
Okay. Hope you enjoyed that last video. Hop on over to statuscoup.com where you can sign up for our email list and become a member for as low as $5 to $10 a month. Membership is how we grow. That's statuscoup.com/join. And remember, join our email list so we can grow the revolution with you.